Hey guys, how's it going? Today I want to speak about the subject of real books versus virtual books. What's better? Well, it all depends on your taste. One thing I can say about virtual books is that you can have literally a library in the palm of your hands, which is amazing because you just have so much information. But there is a certain charm to actually having a book in your hands and being able to feel the paper. And even in older books, they have a certain particular smell. And there's also something to be said about being able to go to a library or a bookstore, or just being able to interact with other people on a more real level with real paper, with real books. And also the fact that sometimes when you have too much available to you, you actually end up not reading everything. It's kind of like if you were to find a file or a website on the internet that could offer you all the books ever written, and you just, in the click of one mouse click, you are able to download all that and then put it on your little tablet that you're reading stuff with. And then you start thinking, well, I got so many things, but how many of these am I just collecting just to say, hey, I completed all the books that have ever been written, as opposed to having actually read them. So sometimes I feel that if you have less, you actually have more in some way, because by actually having the physical book, you're not able to have thousands of books, or even like 100 books at once, because you wouldn't be able to carry them. So if you were to go to a bookstore, to a library, to something else that would sell books, flea markets, whatever it is, you would actually be able to just carry maybe 3-4 books, 5 books, and from those books, if you have them at home and you see them, you have a much greater chance of actually picking up a book to read. Whereas if you actually had thousands and thousands of books in your little tablet or your little reader, whatever brand you're using, then you wouldn't actually read them thoroughly. You might read one page of this, one page of that, be like, oh cool, I got this really rare book, I'm going to look at the illustrations because I know it's rare, but then you don't actually read it from cover to cover, if that makes sense. So there is something called too much information. Having too much information is not always necessarily a good thing, if that makes sense, because then there's the fake with the real, and then you're never able to really come up with a proper reading technique, and you just end up having so much stuff. Of course, having virtual books is actually nice in some way too, for people who just don't have the space to have a library. But at the same time, we have a lot of public libraries pretty much all around us, so except for specific books, you're actually able to pretty much, without having a library at home, you're pretty much able, at least in America, almost everywhere, at a 15-20 minute walk at most, there's libraries. And also these libraries, they're public libraries, so they're interconnected, so you're actually able to order a book from one place to the other. And I think there's also a service where if you do like ebooks, there's a sort of queue, and they can rent out a certain amount of virtual books too, and then you're able to read them or listen to them as audiobooks, because that is actually kind of cool for people who are driving a lot and they want to be entertained but not just listen to music all the time, because sometimes you just want to get educated and learn new things, and music's cool, but sometimes it's nice to also hear someone teaching you some stuff. So you're able to actually listen to these audiobooks and stuff like that, which is kind of cool. But that being said, again, personally, I love being able to go on the internet. I love being able to read some stuff. But if I'm gonna read a book, I don't know. I do like that thing of being able to touch paper, and to actually have these books and support the artist that way. But of course, the fact that you don't need to have all these paper books is kind of cool too, because it saves space, and everything is available to you if you're able to moderate that. And I do think that it's kind of like having streaming movies and all that stuff. So much is given to us all the time, everywhere, that it's really, really difficult to just enjoy the things. Because I do remember as a young kid or stuff like that, you just had less. So when you had a book, sometimes you'd read it a couple times, and then you'd start getting all these nuances and stuff like that. Whereas nowadays, you have all these books that are available to us. So you'll read, let's say you read a book from cover to cover. It's going to be pretty rare, at least for me, to go back to that book, because there's always going to be a sequel to these books often. And then there's also going to be like other books that are in the same style. So you start just reading more of something else, and you don't really basically go into that same book again. But then you're kind of missing out in some way, because you're getting the new, but you're missing out on what maybe you could have read a couple more times, a second time, and gotten more out of it and seen the little details that you wouldn't have seen before. Or if it's something that has a pretty cool ending or whatever, where you're basically just seeing those details, and you're like, oh, this is why this guy did that, or that guy did this. And I just think it's kind of cool. But of course, it takes time. It takes a lot of time. But I do think that that virtual books have obviously, how can I say, they have an advantage. But then also, regular books have an advantage, and it's really up to you to decide. But I do think that eventually, if people have space, it's kind of nice to have your virtual books, but then also have maybe a couple of books that you say to yourself, hey, these are the books that I like. These are the books that I want to kind of like have on my shelf, and maybe have a couple, like 100 or a couple hundred books. Without exaggerating, obviously, that are basically there for you to enjoy and just read once in a while, or read a few pages of it again, or excerpts of it, and not think about being able to just have everything in the palm of your hands. And also there's that to be said, is that a lot of people are reading more nowadays, and ironically it's not even books, it's thanks to the internet. So I guess that's called literature too in some way, because they're reading their news on that, they're reading about different subjects, Wikipedia, etc. And you just have all this knowledge, and it really has changed a lot of the world, and it just goes much more beyond books, because we have this whole virtual world, which is so important with our phones, that it really gave us computers on the tip of our hands. And just the fact that basically you're able to get any info if you need to build something, if you need to cook something, etc. If you need to learn a new skill, you can basically just go on the internet and learn all these things. And that's also in some way virtual books. So as mentioned again, you got to try to find the balance, but there's advantages to having the book, the real physical one, and there's advantages to the virtual one, and it's about you finding the best of both. But there's no right or wrong. It's just that it's a preference, and I think that ultimately people will use both, and I don't think real books are going to disappear completely ever. And it actually leaves us the possibility of more easily publishing ourselves, because everything is virtual, it doesn't cost much. Okay, that's it. That's all I have to say on the subject. Have a great day, and talk to you soon.